The shuttle descended through layers of purple clouds, breaking into clear skies above a world that seemed carved from glass and light. Jake Morrison pressed his hand against the viewport, watching as crystalline towers rose from the surface of the Zithari homeworld like frozen lightning strikes. After 6 months of traveling through space, humanity's first diplomatic mission to an alien civilization was finally arriving at its destination. Beautiful, isn't it? Ambassador Helen Cross said from the seat beside him. She was reviewing her notes one final time, her fingers tapping nervously against her datapad. Try not to stare too much when we land. The Zithari consider prolonged eye contact aggressive. Jake nodded, pulling his gaze away from the window. He adjusted his uniform, the simple gray jumpsuit that marked him as part of the engineering support team. Around him, the other members of the delegation were making their own preparations. General Ryan Blake sat with his arms crossed, his face stern and unreadable. The scientists, Dr. Lisa Grant and Dr. Peter Collins, whispered to each other about the atmospheric composition readings. Everyone had their role to play. The shuttle touched down on a landing platform that seemed to be made of solid diamond. As the doors opened, Jake felt the air hit his face, warm and carrying a scent like ozone and flowers. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth's, making each step feel just a bit easier. A delegation of Zithari waited for them at the base of the ramp. They were tall, nearly 7 feet on average, with skin that shimmered in shades of blue and silver. Their faces were angular and elegant, with large eyes that held depths of purple and gold. They wore flowing robes that seemed to move even when the air was still. At the center of the greeting party stood someone who could only be Queen Vela herself. She was taller than the others, her presence commanding attention without any visible effort. Her robes were deep violet, and a crown of what looked like living crystal grew from her temples, forming an intricate pattern above her head. Her eyes swept over the human delegation with an expression that Jake couldn't quite read. Ambassador Cross stepped forward and bowed in the manner they had practiced. "Your Majesty, on behalf of humanity and the people of Earth, we thank you for welcoming us to your world." Queen Vela's lips curved slightly. When she spoke, her voice had a musical quality that seemed to resonate in the air itself. "Welcome, humans of Earth. We have watched your species with great interest. You are young by the standards of the galaxy, yet you have accomplished much in a brief time." The words were polite, but Jake detected something underneath them. Not quite condescension, but perhaps something close to it. The way someone might praise a child for drawing a picture that wasn't very good. The Zithari led them through halls of crystal and light. Everything seemed to glow from within, casting soft shadows that shifted as they walked. Other Zithari watched them pass, their large eyes following the humans with obvious curiosity. Jake heard whispers in their language, a sound like wind chimes and distant bells. They were brought to a great hall for a formal reception. The room was circular, with a domed ceiling that showed the stars above as clearly as if there were no roof at all. Tables had been arranged in a pattern that seemed random, but probably held some cultural significance. The human delegation was seated together, while Zithari nobles filled the other spaces. Food was brought, strange dishes that the human scientists had assured them were safe to eat. Jake tried a few items, finding the flavors unlike anything he had experienced before. Some were pleasant, others challenging, but he kept his expression neutral and ate politely. Queen Vela sat on a raised platform at the center of the room, watching everything. Jake noticed that her gaze kept returning to the human table, studying them. He felt her attention sweep over him more than once, lingering for just a moment before moving on. The dinner progressed with speeches and toasts. Ambassador Cross did well, striking the right balance between respect and confidence. General Blake spoke briefly about hopes for peaceful cooperation. The Zithari nobles responded with their own words, elegant and carefully crafted. Jake remained quiet, as befitted his position. He was there to support the mission, not to take center stage. Yet he observed everything, noting the body language of the Zithari, the subtle dynamics between the nobles, the way servants moved through the room with practiced efficiency. At one point, a Zithari noble stood and asked a question that made several humans shift uncomfortably. "Tell us, Ambassador Cross, what makes humanity believe they are ready to join the greater galactic community? You have barely left your own solar system. Your technology is centuries behind our own. What do you offer besides curiosity and ambition?" The room went silent. Ambassador Cross maintained her composure, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. Before she could respond, Jake stood up smoothly. "If I may, Ambassador," he said quietly. She nodded, looking relieved. Jake turned to face the Zithari noble. "You're right that we're young and our technology is less advanced. But humanity has something that might interest the Zithari. We've spent our entire existence learning how to solve problems with limited resources. We've faced extinction dozens of times and found ways to survive. We may not have your knowledge, but we have fresh perspectives. Sometimes the newest student asks the questions that reveal truths the masters have forgotten." The Zithari noble's expression was unreadable, but he sat down without further comment. Jake noticed Queen Vela leaning forward slightly, her eyes fixed on him with new intensity. The rest of the evening passed without incident. As the reception ended and the humans were escorted to their quarters, Ambassador Cross pulled Jake aside. "That was well done," she said, "but try not to draw too much attention. We don't know how they'll interpret individual initiative." "Understood," Jake replied. But as he walked to his room, Jake felt eyes on his back. He glanced over his shoulder and saw Queen Vela in the distance, watching him from a balcony high above. Even from far away, he could feel the weight of her scrutiny. Something had caught her attention. Jake wondered if that was good or bad for the mission. He would find out soon enough. The real work was just beginning, and Jake had a feeling that this diplomatic mission was going to become far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The Zithari were not what they seemed, and neither, for that matter, were the humans who had come to meet them. Jake closed the door to his quarters and allowed himself a small smile. Let them underestimate humanity. It wouldn't be the first time, and humans had learned long ago that being underestimated was often an advantage. The game had begun. 3 days had passed since the human delegation arrived on the Zithari homeworld. Jake had settled into a routine of supporting the diplomatic team, checking equipment, ensuring communications with Earth remained stable, and occasionally offering quiet advice when Ambassador Cross asked for it. The negotiations were proceeding slowly, as expected. The Zithari were in no hurry, and humanity had learned patience during their long journey through space. On the morning of the 4th day, a Zithari messenger arrived at the human quarters with an unexpected announcement. Queen Vela requested the presence of the entire delegation in the throne room within the hour. The message gave no explanation, only the summons. Ambassador Cross gathered everyone quickly. "This is unusual," she said, checking her appearance in a mirror. "We weren't scheduled for another formal meeting until next week. Any thoughts?" General Blake frowned. "Could be a test. Or they've made a decision about the trade agreements. Or they're about to send us home," Dr. Collins added nervously. Jake said nothing, but he felt a strange anticipation in his chest. Something was coming, something important. He had learned to trust that feeling over the years. The throne room was even more impressive than the reception hall. The walls seemed to stretch up forever, disappearing into a soft glow that might have been ceiling or sky. Queen Vela sat on a throne that appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal, its facets catching and reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Around the room, Zithari nobles stood in positions that clearly denoted rank and status. Their eyes followed the humans as they entered, expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. Ambassador Cross led the delegation forward and bowed. "Your Majesty, we come as requested." Queen Vela rose from her throne, her movements graceful and deliberate. "Thank you for answering my summons so promptly. Today I wish to invoke an ancient tradition of my people, one we have practiced for thousands of years when encountering new civilizations." She descended the steps from her throne, her robes flowing around her like water. The human delegation waited, uncertain what to expect. When the Zithari meet a new species for the first time, it is our custom for the ruler to select one individual to serve as a personal liaison, Queen Vela continued. "This person will work closely with me, providing insight into their culture, assisting with understanding between our peoples, and serving as a bridge between our worlds. It is a position of great honor and responsibility." Ambassador Cross nodded slowly. "That is indeed an honor, Your Majesty. I would be pleased to serve in such a capacity." "I appreciate your willingness, Ambassador," Queen Vela said. "However, the selection is mine alone to make, guided by my own judgment and the wisdom of my ancestors." She walked along the line of humans, studying each one carefully. She paused before General Blake, then moved on. She stopped for a moment at Dr. Grant, tilting her head as if listening to something unheard, but she did not choose. Then she reached Jake. Queen Vela stood before him for a long moment, her purple and gold eyes meeting his. Jake held her gaze steadily, not aggressively but without looking away. Something passed between them, some unspoken communication that Jake couldn't quite define. "This one," Queen Vela said, turning to face her court. "I select Jake Morrison to serve as my personal liaison to humanity." The reaction was immediate. Several Zathari nobles gasped or whispered to each other. On the human side, Ambassador Cross couldn't quite hide her surprise. General Blake's eyebrows rose. Even Jake felt a moment of genuine shock. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Cross began carefully. "With respect, Jake is part of our support team. Perhaps someone with more diplomatic experience would be better suited." Queen Vela's expression didn't change. "I have made my selection. Does Jake Morrison accept this position?" All eyes turned to Jake. He could feel the weight of the moment, the implications spinning out like threads into an unknown future. This was not what anyone had planned. But deep down, Jake had learned to adapt, to take opportunities as they came. "I accept, Your Majesty," he said clearly. "I'll do my best to serve both our peoples well." "Then it is decided," Queen Vela declared. She gestured to one of her attendants. "Prepare quarters for Jake Morrison near my private chambers. He begins his duties immediately." The formal ceremony concluded quickly after that. As the human delegation was dismissed, Ambassador Cross pulled Jake aside once more, her expression troubled. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "We don't know what she wants or why she chose you specifically." "Neither do I," Jake admitted. "But this could be an opportunity. I'll be able to observe them closely, learn things that formal negotiations won't reveal. Trust me, Ambassador, I've handled unusual situations before." She studied his face, then nodded reluctantly. "Keep your communication device active. Report anything significant. And Jake, be careful. We still don't really understand these people." Within 2 hours, Jake found himself moved into new quarters that were far more luxurious than the shared rooms the delegation had been assigned. His new chambers were close to the royal wing of the palace, with a view overlooking gardens that seemed to glow in the evening light. A servant brought him new clothes, robes similar to what the Zathari wore but adapted for human proportions. Jake changed, feeling strange in the flowing garments but understanding the symbolic importance of the gesture. That evening, Queen Vela summoned him to a private dining room. It was smaller than the Great Hall, more intimate with only the two of them present. Food had been prepared, a mixture of Zathari dishes and some items that looked surprisingly like Earth cuisine. "Please sit," Queen Vela said, gesturing to a cushion across from her own. "We have much to discuss." Jake sat watching her carefully. Now that they were alone, he wondered what she really wanted. "You're curious why I chose you," Queen Vela stated. It wasn't a question. The thought had crossed my mind, yes. She smiled slightly. "Your ambassador is skilled at words. Your general understands strategy. Your scientists possess knowledge. But you, Jake Morrison, are different. You stood up when that noble challenged your people, not because it was your duty, but because it was needed. You spoke simple truth without arrogance or apology. That interested me." Jake remained silent, letting her continue. "There is something else," Queen Vela said, her expression becoming more serious. "The Zathari possess certain abilities. We can sense the thoughts and emotions of most species, read their intentions, understand their desires. It is how we have survived and prospered for so long." She leaned forward slightly. "But when I tried to read you, I found something unexpected. A barrier. A wall in your mind that I cannot penetrate. In all my centuries of life, I have never encountered this in a species so young. It makes me wonder what humanity is hiding behind those walls." Jake met her gaze steadily. "Maybe we're not hiding anything. Maybe we just learned to keep our thoughts our own." "Perhaps," Queen Vela said. "Or perhaps there is more to humanity than appears on the surface. I intend to find out, Jake Morrison. That is why you're here." Jake took a sip of the drink before him, buying himself a moment to think. So that was it. She had chosen him because she couldn't read him, and that made her curious. The queen of an ancient, powerful civilization, confronted with something she couldn't understand, had decided to study it up close. Well, Jake thought, that could work both ways. She wanted to learn about humanity? He would show her exactly what humans were capable of, but he would do it carefully, revealing only what served their purposes. "I'm here to help however I can, Your Majesty," Jake said simply. Queen Vela smiled, and for the first time, it seemed genuine. "I believe this will be an enlightening experience for both of us." As the meal continued, Jake knew that the real mission had just begun. Not the official diplomacy, but something deeper and more personal. A test between an ancient queen and a human who represented a species barely beginning its journey to the stars. The outcome would matter more than either of them yet realized. The days turned into weeks, and Jake settled into his role as Queen Vela's personal liaison. His duties were varied and often unexpected. Some days he spent hours explaining human customs and culture, answering questions about Earth's history, languages, and social structures. Other days he attended council meetings, observing Zithari governance and occasionally offering human perspectives on various issues. Queen Vela watched him constantly, though she tried to be subtle about it. Jake could feel her attention like a weight on his shoulders, always present, always evaluating. She was studying him the way a scientist might study an unusual specimen, looking for patterns and anomalies. But Jake had been studied before, by people far less patient than Queen Vela. He went about his duties with calm efficiency, never revealing more than necessary, always maintaining the pleasant, helpful demeanor of someone simply trying to do their job well. One morning, Jake was summoned to help with a trade negotiation between the Zithari and humanity. Ambassador Cross had been struggling with certain terms regarding technology exchange, and the Zithari negotiators were becoming frustrated with the slow pace. Jake entered the conference room to find tension thick in the air. The Zithari representatives sat on one side of a long crystal table, their expressions cold. Ambassador Cross and her team sat opposite, papers and datapads scattered before them. "Jake," Ambassador Cross said with relief, "perhaps you can help clarify some technical specifications. The Zithari want to know about our power generation systems, but I'm not sure I'm explaining them correctly." Jake took a seat and listened to the questions. The Zithari were interested in Earth's fusion technology, which was primitive by their standards but showed promise. They wanted detailed specifications, but the human delegation wasn't authorized to share certain information without proper agreements in place first. "The issue is trust," Jake said after a moment. "Both sides want to trade, but nobody wants to give away too much before the deal is finalized. That's natural. What if we approached this differently?" He pulled up a datapad and began sketching a framework. "Instead of full specifications now, what if we agree to a phased exchange? Basic principles first, which shows good faith on our side. Once that's verified, more detailed information follows, matched with equivalent Zithari technology. Each phase builds trust for the next." The Zithari negotiators exchanged glances. One of them, an older male named Korath, nodded slowly. "This is acceptable. It shows understanding of mutual benefit." Within an hour, they had a framework that both sides could accept. Ambassador Cross looked at Jake with gratitude and something close to amazement. Queen Vela, who had been observing from a corner of the room, said nothing, but her eyes gleamed with interest. That same afternoon, Jake was walking through the palace gardens when he heard raised voices. He found two members of the human delegation, Dr. Grant and General Blake, arguing near a fountain that sprayed luminescent water into the air. "I'm telling you, we need to request more security," General Blake was saying. "We're exposed here. If something goes wrong, and I'm telling you that requesting security will offend our hosts," Dr. Grant interrupted. "The Zithari have been nothing but hospitable. We can't insult them by implying we don't trust them." Both turned as Jake approached. "Jake, maybe you can talk sense into the general," Dr. Grant said. Jake listened to both arguments, then spoke quietly. "General, your concern for security is valid. Doctor, your concern about offending our hosts is also valid. What if we do both?" They looked at him skeptically. "We request a cultural exchange," Jake continued. "Ask if some of their security personnel would be willing to show us Zithari protection methods. Maybe even train with our own people. Frame it as learning, not suspicion. We get to see their security in action, evaluate their capabilities, and they feel respected rather than distrusted." General Blake thought about it, then smiled grimly. "That's sneaky. I like it." "It's diplomatic," Dr. Grant corrected, but she was smiling too. Queen Vela appeared from behind a hedge of flowers that seemed to bloom as she passed. Your ability to find middle ground is notable, Jake Morrison. You turn conflicts into cooperation with apparent ease. Jake bowed slightly. Just trying to help, Your Majesty. Just trying to help, she repeated as if tasting the words. I wonder if that is truly all you are doing. That evening, Jake was reviewing technical documents in his quarters when an alarm sounded throughout the palace. It was quiet, not the blaring warning of danger, but an alert that something required attention. Jake quickly pulled on his robes and headed toward the source of the disturbance. He found a group of Zithari technicians gathered around a power distribution node in one of the palace's lower levels. Smoke drifted from the crystalline structure, and Jake could smell burning insulation. What happened? He asked one of the technicians. Overload in the quantum resonance chamber, the Zithari replied, barely glancing at him. Stand back, human. This is beyond your understanding. Jake watched them work for a moment, noting their methods. They were trying to reroute power through secondary systems. But from what he could see, that would only shift the problem elsewhere. The real issue was in the primary regulator, which had developed a feedback loop. Excuse me, Jake said politely. I think the problem might be in the primary regulator. If you isolate that first, the secondary systems won't be needed. The lead technician turned to him with barely concealed irritation. Human, our technology is centuries beyond yours. Please do not interfere. Jake shrugged and stepped back. But he noticed Queen Vela standing in a doorway watching. She had been summoned too, and now she observed both the technicians and Jake with equal attention. 15 minutes later, the technician's solution failed, causing a cascade that took offline several other systems. Frustration and concern spread through the group. Your Majesty, we may need to shut down this entire section, the lead technician admitted. Or, Jake said quietly, I could try my suggestion. Queen Vela tilted her head. You understand our technology? Not completely, Jake admitted. But energy is energy and regulation is regulation. The principles are similar even if the execution is different. Show me, Queen Vela commanded. Jake approached the damaged node and studied it closely. He asked for a few tools which were provided reluctantly. Working carefully, he isolated the primary regulator, bypassed the feedback loop using a method that combined Zithari design with human improvisation, and rerouted the flow through a path the technicians hadn't considered. The smoke stopped. The system stabilized. Within minutes, everything was functioning normally again. The Zithari technicians stared at him in disbelief. Queen Vela stepped forward, examining his work. Elegant, she said softly. You saw what my own people missed. Fresh eyes, Your Majesty, Jake said. Sometimes not knowing how something is supposed to work lets you see how it actually works. That night, Queen Vela requested Jake's presence in her private study. It was a smaller room filled with objects from dozens of worlds, trophies and gifts from centuries of diplomacy. You are not what you appear to be, she said without preamble. An engineer who negotiates like a diplomat. A support technician who solves problems our experts cannot. A human who speaks with wisdom beyond his years. What are you really, Jake Morrison? Jake met her gaze steadily. I'm exactly what I appear to be, Your Majesty. A human doing his job to the best of his ability. Maybe that's the question you should be asking. Not what I am, but what humans are capable of when they're just doing their best. Queen Vela circled him slowly, and Jake felt the pressure of her mind against his own, testing his defenses. But the walls held as they always did. You frustrate me, she admitted. I'm accustomed to understanding those around me, to reading their intentions and thoughts. But you remain opaque. It is both irritating and fascinating. Maybe some mysteries are worth keeping, Jake suggested. Or perhaps, Queen Vela said, some mysteries need to be revealed at the right time. I am a patient creature, Jake Morrison. I have lived for centuries. I can wait to learn your secrets. Then we have something in common, Jake replied. Patience is something humans learned a long time ago. As he left the study that night, Jake allowed himself a small smile. Queen Vela was intelligent, perceptive, and powerful, but she was also becoming curious in a way that went beyond simple observation. She wanted to understand humanity, to grasp what made them different. Soon enough, she would get her wish. But the revelation would come on Jake's terms when the moment was right. Until then, he would continue being ordinary, continue being helpful, and continue letting her wonder what lay beneath the surface. The real test, he suspected, was still to come. The announcement came during the morning meal. Queen Vela stood before her assembled court, with Jake seated in his customary place near the royal platform. The Zithari nobles filled the hall, their robes shimmering in colors that denoted rank and family lineage. The human delegation occupied a section near the back, watching with curious attention. "It has been 6 weeks since the humans arrived on our world," Queen Vela declared, her voice carrying easily through the crystalline chamber. "In that time, I have observed their representative closely. I have seen competence and cleverness, but these qualities alone do not earn true respect among the Zithari." Jake felt a prickle of warning run down his spine. Something was coming, something planned. "Therefore," Queen Vela continued, "I invoke the ancient custom of the trials of the Ascendant. Jake Morrison, if you wish to continue serving as liaison between our peoples, you must prove yourself worthy by our standards. You will face 3 trials, one of the mind, one of the body, and one of the spirit. Do you accept this challenge?" The hall fell silent. Jake could feel dozens of eyes on him, some curious, others openly skeptical. He glanced toward Ambassador Cross, who looked alarmed but nodded slightly. She couldn't stop this without causing a diplomatic incident, and they both knew it. Jake stood, bowing to Queen Vela. "I accept, Your Majesty." "When do the trials begin?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Queen Vela said. A slight smile touched her lips. "Tonight you should rest. The trials are not easy, even for Zithari." That evening, Jake returned to his quarters to find General Blake waiting for him. The general's expression was grim. "I did some research on these trials," Blake said without preamble. "They're brutal, Jake. Physical challenges designed for beings stronger than humans. Mental tests that have driven lesser species insane. And the spiritual trial is something nobody wants to talk about, which worries me more than the others combined." "I appreciate the concern, General," Jake said calmly. "Listen to me," Blake continued. "You don't have to do this. We can find a diplomatic way out. Claim that humans have different traditions, something." Jake shook his head. "If I back down now, we lose all credibility. They'll see humans as weak, as afraid. Everything we've built here will collapse." "No, I have to do this." Blake studied him for a long moment. "You're too calm about this. Either you're very confident or you're hiding how scared you are." "Maybe both," Jake admitted with a slight smile. "But I've been in difficult situations before. I'll manage." After Blake left, Jake did something he hadn't done since arriving on the Zithari homeworld. He allowed himself to remember, to access the parts of his mind he usually kept locked away. Training exercises that pushed human limits. Combat situations where split-second decisions meant life or death. Years of education compressed into brutal, efficient learning. He let those memories surface briefly, reminding himself of what he was capable of, then carefully put them away again. Tomorrow would reveal more than he wanted, but it was time. Dawn came with purple light filtering through his windows. Jake dressed in simple clothes provided by Zithari servants, then followed guards to an arena deep beneath the palace. The chamber was enormous, with walls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Tiers of seats rose on all sides, already filled with Zithari nobles eager to watch the human attempt their sacred trials. Queen Vela sat on a throne overlooking the arena floor. The human delegation occupied a small section nearby, their faces tense with worry. "The first trial is of the mind," Queen Vela announced. "Enter the labyrinth, Jake Morrison. Find your way to the center and return. But know this, the labyrinth shows you impossible paradoxes, logical contradictions that break reason itself. Those who fail often lose their sanity. Begin." A doorway opened in the arena floor, revealing stairs descending into darkness. Jake walked down without hesitation, hearing the door seal behind him with a sound like finality. The labyrinth was unlike anything Jake had experienced. The walls shifted, showing images that contradicted themselves. He saw doors that were both open and closed, paths that led both forward and backward simultaneously. Voices whispered equations that proved 1 + 1 = 3, that circles had corners, that time ran in all directions at once. Jake felt pressure building in his mind, the weight of impossibility pressing down on logic and reason. He understood now how this could break someone. The human mind craved order, consistency, rules that made sense. To be confronted with violations of reality itself was fundamentally disturbing. But Jake had learned something during his years of training. Sometimes logic wasn't the answer. Sometimes you had to accept that contradictions could exist. that reality wasn't always rational, and that the only way through was to stop trying to make sense of it. He walked through doors that shouldn't exist. He chose paths that defied geometry. He let go of the need to understand and simply moved forward with instinct and determination. The labyrinth fought him, showing him visions of failure and madness. But Jake pushed through each barrier with stubborn will. After what felt like hours, he reached the center and found a crystal that pulsed with inner light. He touched it, then began the journey back, which was somehow both harder and easier than the trip in. When he finally emerged into the arena, blinking in the light, he saw surprise on dozens of Zythari faces. "Impressive," Queen Vela said. "Few complete the mental trial on their first attempt. But now comes the physical challenge." The arena floor transformed, rising into obstacles and barriers. Jake saw climbing walls that reached toward the ceiling, gaps that would require enormous leaps, sections where fire burned or water rushed. It was a gauntlet designed for beings with Zythari strength and endurance. "Cross from one end to the other," Queen Vela commanded. "You may take as long as you need, but you cannot stop or turn back. Begin." Jake approached the first obstacle, a wall at least 30 feet high with minimal handholds. A Zythari could scale it with ease. For a human, it would be much harder. But Jake had climbed before in conditions far worse than this. He found his rhythm, testing each grip, moving with patient precision rather than speed. He cleared the wall and faced the next challenge, a series of platforms suspended over a pit. The distance between them was just at the edge of what a human could jump. Jake measured each leap carefully, using momentum and technique rather than raw power. He fell once, catching himself on the edge of a platform, muscles straining as he pulled himself up. The watching Zythari murmured in surprise. Through fire he rolled quickly, absorbing minor burns. Through water he swam with efficiency, not fighting the current but working with it. Over walls, under barriers, across sections that required balance and timing. Jake's body screamed protest, fatigue building in his muscles, but he refused to stop. When he finally reached the end, he was covered in sweat, breathing hard, small injuries marking his arms and legs, but he had completed the trial. "Remarkable," Queen Vela said, and this time there was genuine respect in her voice. "Your body is weaker than ours, yet you succeeded through skill and determination. But now comes the final trial. The one that matters most. The trial of spirit." A Zythari priest approached, carrying a chalice filled with liquid that seemed to contain stars. "Drink," Queen Vela said softly, "and face what lies within yourself." Jake took the chalice and drank without hesitation. The liquid burned going down, and then everything changed. He stood in darkness absolute, and from that darkness came his fears given form. He saw failure, saw his friends dying because of his mistakes. He saw humanity rejected by the galaxy, cast out as unworthy. He saw himself as a fraud, a pretender wearing masks he couldn't maintain. The visions were brutal in their specificity, drawing on Jake's deepest insecurities. He saw battles he had fought where his decisions led to casualties. He saw relationships that ended badly. He saw every mistake, every regret, every moment of weakness amplified and repeated. Other species had broken under this trial, unable to face the darkness within themselves. But Jake did something unexpected. He didn't fight the visions. He didn't deny them. Instead, he looked at each one and accepted it. "Yes," he said to the darkness, "I've made mistakes. People have died because of my choices. I carry regrets I'll never fully resolve. I'm not perfect, not even close." The visions wavered. "But I'm still here," Jake continued. "I survived those mistakes and learned from them. I honored those who died by becoming better. I carry my regrets because they remind me to do better next time. My darkness doesn't define me. How I respond to it does." The visions shattered. Jake opened his eyes to find himself back in the arena, kneeling on the floor. He rose slowly, steady despite the spiritual and physical exhaustion. The arena was completely silent. Queen Vela stood from her throne, descending to the arena floor. She approached Jake, her expression one of open amazement. "In all my centuries," she said quietly, "I have never seen someone complete all 3 trials on their first attempt. Even most Zythari fail at least one. You should not have been able to do this." Jake met her gaze. "Maybe humans are harder to break than you thought." Queen Vela studied him for a long moment, then turned to her court. "Jake Morrison has proven himself worthy by our highest standards. Let no Zythari question his place among us or doubt the potential of his species." Jake spent 2 days recovering from the trials. The Zythari medical technology was impressive. healing his injuries far faster than Earth medicine could have managed. But the mental and spiritual exhaustion took longer to fade. He found himself sleeping deeply, dreamlessly, his body and mind demanding rest after the ordeal. On the third day, a servant brought a message. Queen Vela requested his presence in the royal gardens at sunset. It was phrased as a request, but Jake understood it was truly a command. He arrived as the sky turned shades of purple and gold, the twin suns of the Zithari system sinking toward the horizon. The gardens were beautiful in the fading light, with plants that glowed softly as darkness approached, as if storing the sunlight to release slowly through the night. Queen Vela stood beside a fountain, watching the water flow upward in defiance of gravity, before cascading back down in glittering streams. She turned as Jake approached, gesturing for him to join her. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. "Of course, Your Majesty," Jake replied, "though I admit I'm curious why you asked me here." "To talk," Queen Vela said. "Not as queen and liaison, but as two beings trying to understand each other." "Would that be acceptable?" Jake nodded, intrigued. This was a different side of her, less formal, more genuine. They walked together through the gardens, silent for a while. Finally, Queen Vela spoke. "You completed the trials in a way I did not expect. Most who succeed do so through overwhelming the challenges with power or knowledge. You succeeded through something else. Adaptation, acceptance, determination that refused to break even when breaking would have been easier. It made me realize that I have been asking the wrong questions about humanity." "What questions should you be asking?" Jake asked quietly. Queen Vela stopped beside a tree whose branches formed geometric patterns against the darkening sky. "I have been trying to understand what makes humans different. What gives you the abilities I have observed? But perhaps the better question is, why are you different? What shaped you into what you are?" Jake was silent for a moment, considering how to answer. This was a moment of choice, he realized. He could continue deflecting, maintaining the careful distance he had kept until now, or he could begin revealing the truth, trusting that Queen Vela was ready to understand. He chose truth. "Do you know much about Earth's history?" Jake asked. "Only what your delegation has shared," Queen Vela admitted. "A young species recently unified, barely beginning to explore beyond your own world." "That's accurate, but incomplete," Jake said. He sat on a bench carved from crystal, and after a moment Queen Vela joined him. "Let me tell you the story you haven't heard." He began to speak, his voice quiet but clear in the evening air. "Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill us in every possible way. Ice ages that covered continents, droughts that turned fertile lands to desert, volcanic eruptions that darkened the sky, earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes. Our planet was beautiful but brutal." Queen Vela listened without interrupting. "And that was just nature," Jake continued. "We also had to deal with ourselves. For most of our history, humans fought each other constantly. Wars over territory, resources, beliefs, power. We developed more efficient ways to kill each other with every generation. We created weapons that could destroy cities, then weapons that could destroy the entire planet." He looked up at the stars beginning to appear. "Several times we came within moments of extinction by our own hands. Nuclear weapons that could have ended civilization. Diseases we created accidentally while trying to cure other diseases. Environmental damage that nearly made our world uninhabitable. Yet you survived," Queen Vela said softly. "We did," Jake agreed, "but it cost us. Every generation of humans grew up knowing that survival wasn't guaranteed. We learned that the universe didn't care whether we lived or died. We had to care, had to fight for every day, every achievement, every moment of peace." He turned to face her directly. "The Zithari are ancient and powerful. You've had centuries to develop your abilities, your technology, your civilization. You grew strong in relatively stable conditions, building on the achievements of your ancestors. That's not a criticism, Your Majesty. It's simply your path." "And humanity's path was different," Queen Vela said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Humans didn't have the luxury of stability," Jake said. "We had to learn everything the hard way through failure and loss and pain. We didn't develop mental barriers because we were naturally strong. We developed them because we had to protect our sanity in situations that would break most minds. We didn't become adaptable because we were clever. We became adaptable because those who couldn't adapt died." He stood pacing slowly. "Every human alive is a descendant of survivors. People who endured famines, plagues, wars, disasters. People who watched their homes burn, Their families die, their hopes shatter, and still found reasons to keep going. That's in our bones now, Your Majesty. That refusal to surrender, even when surrender would be logical. Queen Vela rose as well, her expression thoughtful. The trials made sense to you because you've been tested all your life. Exactly, Jake said. The mental trial showed me contradictions and impossibilities. But I grew up in a world full of contradictions. Humans who could create beautiful art and terrible weapons. Societies that preached peace while preparing for war. We learned to hold contradictions in our minds without breaking. The physical trial, Queen Vela continued, following the thought. Required endurance over power, Jake finished. Humans aren't the strongest or fastest species on our own planet, much less in the galaxy. But we can outlast almost anything. We evolved as persistence hunters, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. That same trait let me complete your physical trial, not through power, but through refusing to stop. Queen Vela walked to the fountain, trailing her fingers through the impossible water. And the spiritual trial? Jake joined her, speaking quietly. Required me to face my darkness and not be destroyed by it. But humans live with darkness constantly. We know we're capable of terrible things. We've committed atrocities, created suffering, failed in countless ways. But we also know we're capable of better. We carry both realities simultaneously. The key isn't to deny the darkness. It's to acknowledge it and choose light anyway. The garden had grown dark around them, but the glowing plants provided soft illumination. Queen Vela stood silent for a long time, processing what she had heard. You are saying that humanity's weakness is actually your strength, she finally said. Not weakness, Jake corrected gently. Adversity, struggle. The universe tried to kill us in every way possible, and we survived by becoming unkillable. Not through power, but through adaptation. Through determination. Through the absolute refusal to accept extinction. He met her eyes. You asked why I'm different. Why humans seem to have abilities you don't understand. It's because we had to develop them or die. The mental barriers you can't penetrate? We built those during wars where psychological warfare could destroy armies. The adaptability that lets me solve problems in unusual ways? We learned that from centuries of making do with limited resources. The resilience that got me through your trials? That's the inheritance of 10,000 generations who survived the impossible. Queen Vela was silent, and Jake could sense her processing these revelations, fitting them together with her observations over the past weeks. I have lived for centuries, she said slowly. I have met dozens of species, studied hundreds more through our records. But I have never encountered a species quite like humanity. You are young by galactic standards, yet you carry ancient wisdom earned through suffering. You seem weak, yet you possess strength that my people, for all our power, may have lost. And what strength is that? Jake asked. The strength of necessity, Queen Vela said. The Zithari are powerful because we were always powerful. We evolved as dominant beings on a world that offered little challenge. We developed telepathy because we could. We built our civilization because we were capable. But we have forgotten what it means to struggle for survival. We have forgotten the edge that desperation brings. She turned to face Jake fully. You completed my trials not despite being human, but because you are human. Everything your species endured made you exactly what was needed to succeed. I see that now. Jake nodded slowly. We're not superior to the Zithari, Your Majesty. We're just different. We've walked a harder path and it left marks on us. Some of those marks are scars, but some of them are strengths we didn't know we were building. Queen Vela smiled, and for the first time since Jake had met her, the expression seemed completely genuine. You have given me much to consider, Jake Morrison. I asked you to serve as a bridge between our peoples, thinking I would learn simple facts about human culture. Instead, you have shown me something profound about the nature of strength itself. They stood together in the glowing garden, human and alien, sharing a moment of understanding that transcended species. There is more you haven't told me, Queen Vela said. I sense that. Depths you still conceal. Yes, Jake admitted. There is more. But this was a start. A start, Queen Vela agreed, and I find I am eager to learn the rest. Though I suspect that when I do, my understanding of humanity will be changed forever. The attack came without warning. Jake was in the palace library helping Dr. Collins research Zithari medical technology when the first alarm sounded. They were different from the maintenance alerts he had heard before. These were urgent, insistent, carrying a tone that made his instincts flare to life. Dr. Collins looked up from her datapad confused. What's that sound? Jake was already moving toward the door. That's a combat alarm. Stay here and lock the door behind me. But do it, Jake said firmly, then ran into the corridor. The palace was transforming around him. Peaceful hallways suddenly filled with Zithari warriors in armor that seemed to grow from their bodies, crystal and metal merging seamlessly. Servants rushed to secure valuables or escort nobles to sheltered areas. Jake followed the flow of warriors toward the palace center, where Queen Vela would be coordinating the response. He found her in a command chamber he hadn't known existed. The walls displayed tactical information in 3 dimensions, showing the space above the planet in real time. Jake's training let him interpret the display immediately, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A fleet had emerged from a wormhole that shouldn't exist, appearing inside the Zithari defense perimeter. Dozens of ships, dark and angular, bristling with weapons. They were already engaging Zithari orbital platforms, and several of those platforms were going dark. The Calroth, Queen Vela said, noticing Jake's arrival. Her voice was tense but controlled. Our ancient enemies. They have somehow bypassed our early warning systems and attacked directly. How many ships? Jake asked, moving closer to study the tactical display. A Zithari military commander, a stern female named Corva, glanced at him with irritation. This is not your concern, human. Return to the secure areas. Answer him, Queen Vela commanded. I trust his judgment. Corva's expression showed her displeasure, but she complied. 43 vessels. They've already destroyed 7 of our orbital defense platforms and are beginning atmospheric entry. We estimate they'll reach the palace within 2 hours. Jake studied the enemy movement patterns, his mind automatically analyzing attack vectors and tactical decisions. Something felt wrong about this assault. This isn't a conquest, he said. Look at their formation. They're not trying to secure orbital space or establish positions for a sustained siege. This is a decapitation strike. They're coming straight for the palace, for Queen Vela. The room fell silent. Corva looked at the display again, and her expression changed as she recognized the truth in Jake's assessment. He's right, she admitted grudgingly. They're sacrificing strategic advantage for speed. They want to kill the Queen before we can mount an effective defense. Queen Vela's face hardened. Then we will disappoint them. Corva, pull back all forces to palace defense. Sacrifice the outer districts if necessary, but create a killing zone around the royal complex. They will pay for every foot of ground. Yes, Your Majesty. Corva began issuing orders through her communication device. Jake watched the tactical situation develop, his mind racing through possibilities. The human delegation was scattered throughout the palace. Ambassador Cross, General Blake, the scientists, all in danger if the Calroth breached the defenses. Your Majesty, Jake said quietly. The human delegation should be evacuated. We have a shuttle. If we can reach it— No, Queen Vela interrupted. The Calroth have orbital superiority now. Any ship attempting to leave will be destroyed. Your people are safer in the palace shelters with everyone else. She was right, Jake realized. Evacuation wasn't an option. They would have to defend and hope the Zithari military could repel the attack. The next hour passed in tense preparation. Jake helped coordinate the movement of civilians to the secure lower levels. He found the rest of the human delegation and ensured they were together in one of the reinforced shelters. General Blake tried to argue that he should be helping with the defense, but Jake convinced him that keeping the delegation safe was more important than individual heroics. From the command chamber, Jake watched the battle unfold. The Zithari forces fought with impressive skill and technology, their crystal weapons cutting through Calroth ships with devastating effect. But the enemy was relentless, absorbing losses that would have broken most attackers, driving forward with single-minded determination. The first Calroth soldiers reached the palace grounds as the second hour began. They were creatures of nightmare, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark armor that seemed to absorb light. Their weapons fired projectiles that exploded on impact, tearing through crystal walls and Zithari defenders alike. Jake watched the tactical display show red markers spreading through the palace's outer rings. The Zithari warriors fought hard, but the Calroth were winning through sheer brutality and numbers. They've breached the outer defenses, Corva reported, her voice tight with tension, retreating to secondary positions. Queen Vela stood firm, her hands clasped behind her back, watching her palace come under assault with an expression of controlled fury. Jake noticed her fingers trembling slightly, the only sign of her inner turmoil. "Your Majesty," Jake said quietly, moving to her side. "You should move to the secure command center in the lower levels. If they break through, I will not hide while my people fight and die," Queen Vela said firmly. "I'm not suggesting you hide," Jake replied. "But if you're killed, the Zathari lose their queen. That's exactly what the Kalroth want. Don't give it to them." She turned to look at him, and for a moment Jake saw fear in her ancient eyes. Not fear for herself, but for her people, her civilization, everything she had protected for centuries. "Very well," she said. "But you and Corva will come with me. I need advisors I trust." They began moving toward the secure command center, a heavily fortified chamber deep beneath the palace. But as they descended through the crystal corridors, alarms began sounding in the sections ahead of them. "Impossible," Corva breathed, checking her tactical display. "They've already penetrated this deep?" Jake's instincts screamed danger. "It's a trap." They had advanced intelligence about the palace layout. They knew where the secure command center was and sent a team directly there. Even as he spoke, they heard the sounds of combat echoing up through the corridors below. Explosions, weapons fire, the screams of the wounded and dying. "We need to go back," Corva said, already turning. But explosions erupted from the corridor they had just left. Kalroth soldiers poured through the breached walls, their weapons firing indiscriminately. The Zathari guards with them moved to engage, their crystal weapons flashing. Jake, Queen Vela, and Corva found themselves trapped between two enemy forces, in a corridor that was rapidly becoming a death trap. "This way," Jake shouted, spotting a side passage. He grabbed Queen Vela's arm and pulled her toward it, Corva following close behind. They ran through passages that grew narrower and less finished, moving into sections of the palace that were clearly maintenance areas rather than formal spaces. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. They emerged into a large chamber that Jake recognized as one of the palace defense control rooms. Crystal panels lined the walls, displaying various systems and security feeds. It was empty, the operators having fled when the attack began. "We can make a stand here," Corva said, positioning herself near the entrance. She held her weapon ready, her expression grim. "I'll hold them as long as possible. You need to protect the queen." Jake moved to one of the control panels, his hands flying over the interface. "Give me a minute." "We don't have a minute," Corva snapped. "Then buy me one," Jake replied without looking up. The first Kalroth soldiers appeared in the entrance. Corva fired, her weapon tearing through their armor with focused beams of energy. They fell, but more came behind them. She kept firing, dropping enemy soldiers with impressive accuracy, but Jake could see she was being overwhelmed. "Jake!" Queen Vela's voice held fear now, real and undisguised. "Almost there," Jake muttered, his fingers dancing across controls he was only partially familiar with. He was accessing the palace defense grid, trying to find something, anything that could help them. A Kalroth weapon blast hit near Corva, throwing her back. She rolled to her feet, injured but still fighting. But there were too many now. A dozen Kalroth soldiers pouring into the chamber. Jake's hands stopped moving across the panel. He had found what he was looking for, but using it would reveal things he had hoped to keep hidden longer. He looked at Queen Vela, saw the trust in her eyes despite her fear, and made his decision. "Get down," he shouted. His fingers moved across the interface with sudden, perfect precision. Systems activated that the Zathari operators would have needed minutes to access. Security protocols bypassed with methods that should have been impossible for someone who had been on this world for only 2 months. Every defense turret in the chamber activated simultaneously. Energy beams lanced out from hidden positions, targeting the Kalroth soldiers with lethal accuracy. In seconds, the enemy forces were eliminated. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of distant combat and the hum of active weapon systems. Corva stared at Jake, her expression shocked. Queen Vela stood slowly, her eyes wide. "How did you—" Corva began. "Later," Jake said. "Right now, we need to use this position to coordinate the palace defense. Your Majesty, I need access to your military command network." Jake's fingers moved across the Zathari command interface with a speed and precision that made Corva step back in shock. Within seconds, he had accessed tactical overlays that should have required multiple security clearances and specialized training to even understand, much less operate. The Calroth are using a distributed assault pattern, Jake said, his voice taking on a different quality, sharper, more focused, the tone of someone who had done this many times before. They're hitting 12 different points simultaneously to divide your forces, but they're overextended. If we reinforce sectors 3, 7, and 11, we collapse their formation and trap about 30% of their ground forces. Queen Vela moved to stand behind him, watching data flow across the screens. How can you know this? Because it's a classic hammer and anvil variation, Jake replied, his fingers still flying. We use similar tactics during the North African campaigns. The execution is different, but the principles are identical. Corva, I need you to relay these coordinates to your field commanders. Corva looked at Queen Vela, who nodded. The military commander began transmitting Jake's instructions, though her expression showed she still didn't trust him fully. Jake pulled up another screen, analyzing the orbital situation. The Calroth fleet is maintaining position rather than pressing their advantage. They're waiting for the ground assault to succeed. If we can turn back the palace attack, they'll be forced to either commit their fleet or withdraw. My guess is they'll withdraw. This whole operation screams of political desperation, not military strategy. You speak as if you've planned military operations, Queen Vela said quietly. I have, Jake admitted, not taking his eyes from the screens. More than I can count. Your Majesty, I need to tell you something, but right now we need to focus on survival. Questions can wait until we're not about to be overrun. A massive explosion rocked the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling, and several displays flickered. They've breached the inner sanctum, Corva said, her voice tight. Jake's tactical adjustments are working in the outer sectors, but we have enemy forces in the royal chambers now. Jake pulled up security feeds showing Calroth soldiers moving through ornate halls toward their position. There were at least 20 of them, heavily armed, moving with military precision. We need to fall back, Corva said. I'll cover your retreat. No, Jake said. We make our stand here. This room is defensible, and abandoning the command center means losing tactical coordination. One human and one injured Zithari warrior cannot hold against 20 Calroth soldiers, Corva said bluntly. Jake turned to look at her, and something in his expression made the veteran warrior take a step back. You're right. One engineer and one injured warrior couldn't. But that's not what you have. He moved to a storage panel he had noticed earlier and opened it, finding what he expected, an emergency weapons cache. He selected a Zithari plasma rifle, checked its charge with movements that spoke of long familiarity. With weapons, then picked up 2 more and handed one to Corva and one to Queen Vela. Your Majesty, have you ever fired a weapon? Jake asked. Not in 3 centuries, Queen Vela admitted. It's simple. Point, press here, and everything in front of you ceases to exist. Stay behind cover and only fire when you have a clear target. Understand? Queen Vela nodded, taking the weapon with hands that trembled slightly. Jake positioned himself near the entrance, using a crystal pillar for cover. Corva took up position on the opposite side, her earlier injury apparently forgotten as her warrior training took over. 20 soldiers, Corva said. Even with defensive advantage, the odds are not favorable. They never are, Jake replied. A slight smile crossed his face. But I've beaten worse odds. The first Calroth soldiers appeared in the entrance. Jake's response was immediate and devastating. His first shot took the lead soldier in the center of his chest, dropping him instantly. His second and third shots hit 2 more before they could even register the threat. His movements were fluid, efficient, the actions of someone who had spent years in combat. Corva joined the fight, her shots methodical and accurate. But she couldn't help noticing how Jake moved, the way he anticipated enemy positions, the efficiency of his targeting, the combat awareness that kept him always in cover while maintaining a clear line of fire. The Calroth soldiers tried to rush the entrance. Jake dropped 4 of them in rapid succession, his weapon never seeming to miss. Those who made it through found themselves caught in a crossfire between Jake and Corva, cut down before they could establish positions. Reloading, Jake called out, dropping his depleted weapon and smoothly drawing a backup sidearm he had taken from the weapons cache. He fired with his offhand with the same accuracy he had shown with the rifle. Queen Vela watched from her position, weapon unused, too stunned by what she was witnessing to do anything but stare. This was not an engineer helping in an emergency. This was a trained warrior, someone who moved through combat as naturally as others might walk through a garden. The Calroth adapted, using suppression fire to keep Jake and Corva pinned while they tried to flank. But Jake had already anticipated this. His earlier access of the command systems included activating automated defenses in the adjacent corridors. The flanking soldiers ran into automated turret fire and were cut down before they could threaten the command room. Within 3 minutes, the assault was broken. Calroth bodies littered the entrance and the survivors had withdrawn to regroup. Jake checked his weapons charge, then moved to the command interface to verify the palace-wide situation. The reinforcements I called for have arrived at the key sectors. The Calroth formation is collapsing. They're beginning to withdraw. Corva approached him slowly, her weapon lowered. You fought like a Zithari warrior with centuries of combat experience. No, better than that. You fought like someone who had seen war and mastered it. Jake didn't respond immediately. He pulled up the orbital display and confirmed that the Calroth fleet was indeed beginning to withdraw, having realized their ground assault had failed. Queen Vela set down her unused weapon and walked toward Jake. No more deflections, no more partial truths. Tell me what you really are, Jake Morrison. Jake took a breath, then turned to face her fully. All right, the full truth. He gestured at the screens around them. I'm not just an engineer, though I do have engineering degrees. I'm not just a liaison, though I can perform diplomatic functions. I was a captain in Earth's Special Operations Forces before being selected for this mission. I have 16 years of combat experience across 4 different theaters. I hold advanced degrees in strategic studies, xenopsychology, systems engineering, and linguistics. I'm trained in over 30 forms of combat, proficient with virtually every weapon system Earth has developed, and specialized in rapid adaptation to unknown situations. He paused, watching their reactions. I'm what humans call a polymath, someone trained in multiple disciplines to expert levels. And I'm not unique. Every human sent on this first contact mission has similar capabilities. Different specializations, but the same fundamental training. We're all soldiers, scholars, diplomats, engineers, scientists. Earth didn't send specialists. We sent people capable of adapting to any situation. Why? Queen Vela asked. Why hide this? Because we didn't know how you would react, Jake said honestly. First contact is delicate. If we had arrived showing our full military capabilities, you might have seen us as a threat. If we had presented ourselves as only diplomats, you might have seen us as weak. So we showed you what we thought you wanted to see. A young species, eager to learn, not threatening to established powers. Corva shook her head in disbelief. All humans are like this? Trained in multiple disciplines, capable in multiple roles? Not all, Jake admitted, but far more than other species seem to expect. On Earth, specialization is considered a weakness. We teach our children to be adaptable, to learn constantly, to master multiple skills. A scientist is also taught history and philosophy. A soldier is also taught arts and ethics. An engineer is also taught diplomacy and strategy. We believe that the strongest individuals and the strongest civilization are those who can adapt to anything. He looked at Queen Vela directly. When I told you that humans learned resilience through adversity, I wasn't just talking about our past. It shaped our entire approach to education, training, and development. Every human is taught to be a survivor first because our history taught us that specialization makes you vulnerable. The engineers who only knew engineering died when they needed to fight. The warriors who only knew combat died when they needed to think. So we learned to be everything. Queen Vela moved to stand directly in front of him. Jake felt the pressure of her telepathic probe against his mental defenses, stronger than ever before, demanding entry. Show me, she said. Lower your barriers and show me the truth. I need to understand. Jake hesitated. What she was asking would expose everything, his memories, his training, his experiences, the full reality of what humanity had become. It would be intimate and invasive, showing her things he barely shared with other humans. But she deserved the truth. She had trusted him, protected him, given him opportunities to prove humanity's worth. And right now, with her palace under attack and her people dying, she needed to understand what kind of allies